Abandoned places have a way of pulling people in. The mystery, the decay, the stories left behind. But there's a reason they've been left to rot. Time isn't the only thing lurking in those empty halls. Sometimes it's the echoes of the past, things that refuse to be forgotten. Other times, it's something worse. Something watching, waiting. People go into these places for a thrill, for adventure. But not all of them make it back out. And some never leave at all. It had been raining for nearly an hour. The storm was relentless, hammering against my windshield as I drove down an empty highway, miles away from the nearest town. I was heading home after visiting my parents, exhausted from the long drive, when my car sputtered. Then, the dashboard lights flickered. The engine let out a dying groan. And just like that, the car rolled to a stop on the side of the road. I gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding. This stretch of road was deserted. No cars had passed in over 20 minutes. My phone had no service. I tried the ignition. Nothing. I checked my gas. Half a tank left. This wasn't supposed to happen. Then, through the curtain of rain, I saw it. A gas station, barely visible in the distance. I didn't remember passing one before, but I didn't have a choice. I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the storm. The gas station looked old, like it had been built decades ago and never updated. The flickering neon sign out front read, "Morgan's Fuel, open 24 hours. But something about it felt wrong. The gas pumps were rusted, the windows were caked in grime, and the sign above the door hung crooked, swaying slightly in the wind. I stepped inside, dripping wet, expecting to hear the usual ding of a door sensor. Nothing. Just silence. The inside was worse. The shelves were half empty, stocked with dusty cans of food, long past their expiration dates. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, flickering. A single register sat at the counter, covered in a layer of dust, and behind it, an old security camera, still on. The tiny red light blinked as if someone somewhere was watching me. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I walked further inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty store. There were no footprints in the dust on the floor, like no one had been here in years. Then, a creak from the back of the store. I turned the corner, heart hammering. A door stood slightly open, leading to the stockroom. A dim, flickering light bulb swung from the ceiling. I stepped closer, and then I saw them. A row of chairs, 6 in total, lined up against the wall, and in each chair sat a figure, motionless, pale-skinned. Their heads were slumped forward, faces hidden. Their bodies looked lifeless, but I knew they weren't. Because as I stood there, frozen in terror, one of them twitched. I took a step back, trying to steady my breathing. Then, the closest figure jerked its head up. Its face was wrong. Skin too tight, eyes pure white, mouth hanging slightly open, like it was mid-scream. Then all at once, the others lifted their heads too, and in unison, they stood up. I ran. I bolted for the door, slipping on the wet tile as I stumbled back into the front of the gas station. Behind me, the sound of feet scraping against the floor grew louder. They were chasing me. I slammed into the glass door and shoved it open, bursting into the rain. The neon sign above me flickered violently, casting warped shadows on the wet pavement. I sprinted toward my car, my shoes splashing through puddles. But when I reached it, the doors were locked. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking violently. In the reflection of my driver's side window, I saw them, standing at the edge of the gas station, watching, waiting. Then, They moved. Not running, not walking, just gliding, fast, too fast. I yanked the door handle, nothing. Then, without warning, my car turned on, by itself. The headlights flashed, the dashboard lit up, the engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and slammed the car into drive. The tires screeched as I sped away. I checked the mirror. They were standing in the road, illuminated by my taillights, their heads tilted unnaturally. And as I drove into the night, I heard something over the radio. A whisper. Software, faint. Come back. I didn't stop driving for over an hour. I didn't look back. When I finally reached a rest stop, I parked beneath the bright lights, hands still trembling. I checked my phone. Service was back. I opened my GPS, trying to figure out where I had broken down, but the map showed nothing. No gas station, no stop named Morgan's Fuel, like it had never existed. I checked online for old records of gas stations on that highway. I found something. Morgan's Fuel, abandoned since 1983. Burned down after robbery, gone wrong. The bodies of 6 employees were never recovered. Locals claimed to see lights on in the ruins, figures standing at the edge of the road, and the last recorded words spoken by passerby who stopped there. They asked me to stay. I don't take that route anymore. I don't drive at night if I can help it. I've been hiking alone for years. There's something about the solitude, the silence, and the raw connection to nature that's addictive. Some people find it terrifying, being alone in the vast wilderness, miles from help, but I loved it. That changed last year. Because that was the time I found the building. I was deep in a national park in Montana, following an old, barely marked trail I had found on a forum. It was supposedly restricted, but that only made it more interesting. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just dead air. Then, after about 4 hours of hiking, I saw it. A massive building, hidden deep within the trees. It shouldn't have been there. There were no roads, no signs, no paths leading to it. Just an enormous concrete structure, covered in moss and vines, like it had been forgotten by time itself. I stood there staring, feeling a deep, unnatural wrongness settle in my gut. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I stepped closer. The place looked like an old research facility, tall, windowless, built like a bunker. There were no markings, no signs to indicate who had built it or why. Then I saw the door. A massive metal door, rusted at the edges, slightly ajar. Something had forced it open. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to pretend I had never seen it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and that's why I stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of decay and mold. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a long concrete hallway lined with faded signs and broken lights. Everything was covered in dust. No footprints. No signs of recent activity. But something about it felt lived in, like something had been here, or still was. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the empty hall. The first few rooms were empty, filled with old desks, scattered papers, and broken monitors. Then I found something weird. A chair, bolted to the floor, with leather restraints. The walls around it were scratched. Deep gouges like someone, or something, had been trying to claw their way out. And on the far wall, written in faded red paint, "Don't open the doors." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. That's when I heard it. A bang, somewhere deep in the facility. Loud, metallic, like a door slamming shut. I froze. I had been alone when I entered. At least, I thought I had. I wanted to leave. But as I turned back, something caught my eye. A map on the wall, faded but still readable. It showed the entire building layout. Most of it was just offices and labs, but at the bottom of the map was an area labeled Sub-Level 3, Containment. The word restricted was stamped across it. Something about that word sent a fresh wave of unease through me. And then, another bang. Closer. I picked up my pace, retracing my steps toward the exit. But when I reached the entrance, the door was closed. I knew I had left it open. I grabbed the handle and yanked. It didn't budge. Something had locked me in. And then, from deeper in the building, footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, echoing through the concrete halls. Not human footsteps. Too heavy. Too unnatural. I killed my flashlight, pressing myself against the wall. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, breathing. Deep, guttural breathing. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I ran. I didn't care where. I just needed to get away. I turned corner after corner, the walls blurring past me. Then, another door. I shoved it open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. I flicked my flashlight back on, my heart hammering, and nearly screamed, because I wasn't alone. The room was filled with chairs, all bolted to the floor like the one I had seen earlier. And in each chair was a figure. Not people, not anymore. They were emaciated, skeletal, their skin stretched too tightly over their bones. Their faces were blank, their mouths too wide, their eyes black pits, and they were all facing me. Then, in unison, they turned their heads. I tore the door open and ran harder than I ever had in my life. Behind me, I heard movement, the scraping of chairs, the shuffle of bare feet on concrete. I didn't look back. I just ran. The hallways blurred, my vision tunneling as I searched for a way out. Then, by some miracle, a staircase. I flew up the steps, taking them 3 at a time. And there at the top, a door, with a rusted push bar. I slammed into it, bursting outside. Into the woods. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Didn't stop driving until I was miles away. When I finally got back to my hotel, I locked the door and sat on the bed, shaking. I told myself I would call the authorities, that I would report the building, tell someone what I saw. But when I checked my map, there was nothing there. No buildings, no restricted area, just forest, like it had never existed. I cut my trip short the next morning. Didn't hike again for months. And to this day, I don't know what I found out there. Me, Nick, Ethan, and Jordan had been obsessed with urban exploration for years. We weren't brave enough to do it ourselves, but we spent hours watching YouTube videos of people sneaking into abandoned buildings, asylums, schools, underground tunnels. Then one night, after a few too many beers, Jordan said something that changed everything. We should go to one. At first, we laughed it off. But the more we talked about it, the more the idea stuck. And somehow, a week later, we were standing outside the abandoned Blackwood Hospital. Blackwood had been shut down in the late 80s, after a scandal involving patient mistreatment. There were stories of botched surgeries, electroshock therapy gone wrong, and nurses who disappeared without a trace. Locals swore the place was haunted. We thought that was bullshit. And that's exactly why we went in. The front entrance was chained shut, so we had to climb in through a broken window. The second my feet hit the floor, a wave of unease washed over me. The air was stagnant, thick with the smell of rotting wood and mildew. Flashlights flickered over peeling paint, broken gurneys, shattered glass. "Looks like something straight out of a horror movie," Ethan muttered. Jordan grinned. "Perfect." We started in the main hallway, checking rooms one by one. Most were empty, just rusted beds and abandoned medical equipment. Then, in one room, we found an old wheelchair. Nick laughed and pushed it. The wheels let out a loud, ear-piercing squeak. But when it stopped, it rolled back on its own. We all froze. "Probably just the floor slanting," Jordan said, forcing a chuckle. But none of us believed that. We kept moving, deeper into the hospital. Ethan, who was filming the whole thing, whispered, "This is where they did lobotomies." The thought made my skin crawl. The walls were covered in graffiti, but some of it was old, scratched in, not sprayed, like someone had carved it in with their fingernails. I traced my fingers over a set of words barely visible beneath the grime. "Don't follow them." Jordan was the first to hear it, a faint tapping sound. We stopped, shining our flashlights down the darkened hallway. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, rhythmic, like someone dragging their fingers along the walls. "Wind," Nick whispered, but there was no wind. Then up ahead, we saw it. A shadow moved across the hallway. Not a trick of the light, not a rat. Something tall, human-shaped, and it wasn't us. We booked it, running in the opposite direction. We didn't care where we went, we just needed to get away. But Blackwood was a maze, and we found ourselves in a part of the hospital we hadn't seen before. The morgue. Rows of metal slabs, body lockers lining the walls. Ethan's breathing was ragged. "I think we lost it." Then Nick pointed at one of the body lockers. The door was open, and inside we saw a set of footprints, fresh, like someone had just stepped out. We ran again, heart pounding, legs burning. We found a stairwell and took the steps two at a time, desperate to get back to where we started. But when we reached the second floor, the layout was different. The graffiti was gone. The walls were clean, and the lights were on. The hospital wasn't abandoned anymore. Something was wrong. The air smelled sterile, like rubbing alcohol. Down the hall we heard voices, muffled, indistinct, like an operating room. Then, a scream, blood-curdling. It came from behind a nearby door, marked surgical wing. We stood there, frozen. Then the door creaked open, and a figure stepped out. A doctor, but his face was blurry, like something was wrong with my vision. He lifted his hand and pointed at us. Then the lights flickered, and everything was dark again. We were back in the abandoned hospital. The walls were decayed again, the smell of rot filling the air. Nick was shaking. Did we all see that? None of us answered, because from the darkness ahead, we heard footsteps, not ours. Something was coming. We sprinted back the way we came, desperately searching for the broken window we climbed through. But every hallway looked the same. "Where the hell is the exit?" Ethan panted. Then I saw something up ahead, a figure standing in the doorway. Jordan skidded to a stop. "Is that?" Number. It wasn't a person. It was a shadow. A void in the shape of a man. And it wasn't alone. Figures filled the hallway behind it. Faceless doctors, nurses, patients. Their heads twitched unnaturally. They started moving toward us. We turned and ran the other way. That's when I saw it. The broken window. Daylight streamed through the shattered glass. We pushed each other forward, practically shoving ourselves out into the cold, morning air. The second my feet hit the pavement, I collapsed. I looked up at the hospital. It was silent again. The figures were gone. But one thing was different. The window we had climbed through, it was intact. like we had never been inside. We never talked about what happened. Never went back. But a few days later, Ethan checked his camera. Most of the footage was static, distorted beyond recognition. But near the end of the video, for just a few frames, something was there. A face staring into the camera. Not one of us.